Hey everybody. All right, in this video I have a very special guest with me. I'm sure you're familiar with him. He's been on the channel many times. A good friend of the channel. His name is George, Disney Family Man 23. Hey George.
Hey Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing great, sir. So in this video, oh, actually, you know what? Before we get started though, go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you on social media, on YouTube, and what have you.
Sure. Well, as you had mentioned in the introduction, I'm George, also known as Disney Family Man 23. That's my YouTube channel. You could check me out. I've been trying to keep up posting some new videos every couple days or so, but I got new material coming out soon. And then you could also listen in on the Grand Circle Tour podcast. You can listen to that on iTunes and Stitcher. Just type in Grand Circle Tour podcast. We should come right up. And then you could also follow me on Twitter at Disney George. And you can find me even on Facebook, just George Falcione.
Perfect. Well, thanks, George. So I wanted to bring you on. I watched yesterday this new documentary on Disney Plus called Howard, about Disney legend Howard Ashman. And Howard Ashman, I mean, his contribution to Disney animation and really the Walt Disney Company in general is immeasurable. I mean, he's a giant in this company. But you also watched it. What are your overall thoughts on that documentary?
Well, first off, I have to say I was looking forward to this for quite some time when producer and writer and director Don Hahn released it, stating that there is going to be a Howard Ashman documentary for Disney Plus. I was all over it. I couldn't wait for this because I just love watching sort of like the behind the scenes kind of thing, like whether it's with Walt Disney Imagineering or the films or television or even music. Like I just love watching like the behind the scenes process of what it takes to make something. And especially like with a biopic or like a memoir type of thing where it tells the story of a particular person, more so like an intimate portrait. That's what I like to say. And I had actually wrote to Don Hahn, thanking him for making this documentary, and he was nice enough to write back to me. So I thought that was really cool.
Wow.
But to your question, I absolutely love this documentary because it touched upon certain aspects that a lot of people didn't really know about Howard, or they did know. And it's not kind of a conversation piece that you like to talk about because there were a lot of things involved with his life that it even affected his work. And I'm for sure we'll get into that, talking about the documentary, because there was a lot of things that he had to keep to himself that he felt would have jeopardized his job and the relationship with the Walt Disney Company.
Yeah. I mean, it was very interesting, the amount of detail they kind of dived into with this documentary, like you mentioned, and that balance, that work-life balance of like hiding the disease, because like you said, he was fearful of what the repercussions might be if it got out that he had this, and trying to make these movies. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. Now, I wanted to talk to you about, because like when Walt Disney died, right, in 1966, when Walt Disney passed away, I feel like from that point on through the 70s to like really like the mid 80s, the Disney Company was sort of a shell of its former self. They were still doing animated films, they were still making theme parks, but it just never felt the same. It felt more shallow, more hollow than it did when Walt was alive. It didn't have that same oomph that it did when Walt was around. And it's interesting because like when Howard came on board and kind of like reminded the animation group who they were and how to do musicals again and everything, it's sort of it was sort of like a revitalization of almost not just Disney animation, but of the company in general. Would you agree with that? I mean,
Oh,
would you?
absolutely. Absolutely. And the one thing that Howard did differently that I think made it even more, as Walt would have said, plussed it, because the way that Howard did it was he worked his magic so to speak, quote unquote,
Yeah.
uh, like Walt Disney as a producer or as an executive producer, where he knew how to run a storyline, but yet he was also like the Sherman brothers, where he knew how to make great music to complement the story. The music complemented the story complemented the music. And the one thing that Howard did that I think really pushed the Renaissance era for Disney was when you watch The Little Mermaid and you watch Beauty and the Beast, and I'll even say when you watch Aladdin, because even though he wasn't around for Aladdin, he still had his say-so with Alan Menken, with working on some of the songs, is that when you watch them, they are like animated Broadway musicals. It's almost like you going to the theater and watching a live Broadway musical, but in animation format.
Right.
And to me, I just felt like Howard paved that way, even to today's movies, like when you watch The Princess and the Frog, Tangled, Frozen, they have that Broadway-esque style type of movie where it's like, okay, this has the potential to become a Broadway show. And I feel that Howard actually started that with The Little Mermaid.
Yeah, no, completely. He did. He completely started that. And he started like even recent films, like, well, semi-recent films like Princess and the Frog, and then you have like Tangled and like even Frozen. These movies are working off that same template that Howard started with that Little Mermaid, and it's incredible to think about. And he really was a revolutionary. And I think even it was Roy Disney that even said that he was like another Walt, And I mean, I don't know how you could even argue otherwise. I mean, he really was. He came into this and he really he had that same, like when you watch the documentary, when you watch him in these story pitch meetings and all this stuff, you can sense that. Like he had, like when Walt Disney was in the room talking to his animators or the story guys, he had that presence, right? Like he just commanded the stage, so to speak, right? Howard Ashman had that same presence. When he was in the room kind of pitching his ideas, you could hear a pin drop. Like everyone was like laser focused on Howard Ashman. It was that same energy,
And that's why everyone who has worked with him, they kind of titled him as being a genius, because when he spoke, it's almost like he was stubborn in a way to where he knew what he wanted, but it's not just because of what he wanted. He knew it would work.
Right.
And he wanted to convey everyone else to say, no, trust me, this is what it'll be. And because even part of it when Jeffrey Katzenberg was part of the Walt Disney Company and everything, that he suggested to take out Part of Your World. And quoting Howard, I actually chuckled at this, and Howard just over my dead body. And it's like,
you know what? I love you, Howard Ashman. God bless you, man. Like, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like a lot of these guys, they don't understand. They think like I remember that scene, and it was like they were that like Katzenberg and a lot of the executives are worried. Oh well, kids are going to get bored. I mean, it's a ballad, and there's not a whole lot of action going on. There's going to be a lot of kids that are going to get restless in the theater. And I'm like, I mean, Walt Disney never pandered to children. He didn't. He held kids up to a higher standard. He didn't like Chernabog in Fantasia. He didn't water that scene down because kids might get scared. He's like, you know what, kids can handle that. He didn't water his content down, and I feel like Howard Ashman is that same mindset. Kids can handle a slower scene for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. It's not going to throw the movie. And not only did it not throw the movie, but that scene is one of the most iconic scenes in not just animation history, but cinema history. I mean, that it's an incredible scene, and music. The music was obviously also iconic. I mean, I'm so glad Howard Ashman stuck to his guns on that one.
Yeah, and especially because, as we were saying earlier, that it helped with the storyline.
Right.
It wasn't too far into the film when Ariel started singing that song, but it explained to the audience through music of, what was her goal, what was her intention, where did she want to be, like how did she feel. And I think if you would have cut that song out, it would have made her transition of becoming from a mermaid to a human less meaningful.
Right. No, completely. Completely. And it's funny because we kind of look back on, without like these like insider details, right? Like back then we thought, oh, Katzenberg is the brains behind the whole operation. He's a genius. But then you hear details like this and you're like, well, was he though? Like it seems like he, like it was Howard, that was really the driving force, because even when Katzenberg left and went to DreamWorks, now personally, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the stuff that Katzenberg did, like with Shrek and stuff. I'm not a huge Shrek person. You know, I can see now, okay, who was in charge really, like who was really making these creative calls, for these Renaissance films, because it's apparent when Katzenberg left and he started his own company, what kind of films he made. And again, there's nothing wrong with the DreamWorks movies, but I can just tell that
There's a difference in comparison between the Disney and the DreamWorks films. You can definitely tell.
you can definitely tell, and I think that, like, and I've said this many times, when it comes to Disney animation, it needs to be timeless. You can't have a lot of dated references, a lot of modern references, a lot of things that are going to kind of date it for future generations. And I think there's a reason why The Little Mermaid still resonates with fans, because they didn't really do that in their films. It was a more timeless sense of story, where like when Katzenberg left, he kind of went with his own thing and did a very modern, edgy, hip, spoofy kind of style. And like Shrek isn't really that relevant anymore. And I think that's part of the reason, So I'm really, really glad Howard Ashman stuck to his guns. I'm glad he said there's no way part of this world is getting removed, because that really made the movie. It really is the When You Wish Upon a Star of The Little Mermaid.
It really is. It most definitely is. And I think as far as like of the Disney company goes, they need more people like Walt, like
Right.
Howard, because yes, I do get it. It's a company. You need that executive side. You need that CEO side, and they all have, Michael Eisner did what he had to do to better the company. Bob Iger did what he had to do for the company, but that's just speaking on the CEO and executive side. I feel that you also need that little voice in the back of your head, sort of like Jiminy Cricket, as your conscience. And that's how I take Walt and Howard. It's like, okay, I get the corporate side, but let's look upon what this company was founded on, and let's not, let's let it be for what it should be.
Right. Yeah, completely. And that's an interesting point you brought up there. And because we lost Howard way too soon. He was a young man. He was like 40, right, when he passed
40.
away.
Yep.
We lost him way too soon. And this is all speculation, but like, had Howard been with us longer, what do you think his path would have been with Disney? Like, what like, do you think that he would have ultimately rose the ranks and become the CEO eventually, or to run the company, or what do you feel like in terms of Howard? Like, if he were to live beyond the 40, and he was still with us, where would he have ended up?
I think as far as, because the thing with Howard, he also had executive producer under his belt. I
Right.
mean, he had a lot of, not just with the music and everything, he had to do with even the storyline of where it was going. He was in those storyboard meetings. He was in with the writing team. He was involved with everything. And there are even little snippets that they never really touched upon in the documentary, and I actually wish that they would have. But there were certain parts, like just of speaking of The Little Mermaid, that would have not been in the movie had it not been for Howard.
Wow.
Such as the line with Ursula when she goes, No talking, singing, zip. That
Wow.
little, that little at the end, that was Howard. And then the other one was how Sebastian was.
Jamaican.
What's that?
How Howard said that Sebastian to be Jamaican.
Jamaican, yeah, exactly. I mean, can you picture Sebastian any other way? It was
No.
like, so it's like, even though it may seem irrelevant, but they were very small things that actually brought the story out. So, again, I know I'm probably exaggerating your question, but I think based off of that notion, I think he would have gone very far with the company. I still think that he would be with the company, and I think he would probably be the John Williams of the Walt Disney Company as far as the music goes.
Yeah, and I'm actually gonna go a little further than that, and my answer might surprise you. Um, I think that if he was still around, I think he ultimately would have ended up being the CEO. I think that when you have somebody like Howard Ashman, who, like Roy said, and like you can even see, was a very Walt-like figure and kind of commanded the stage, so to speak, when he spoke, and he understood story, he understood Disney so well. I could have seen him eventually taking the helm. Maybe he would have rose the ranks and eventually have become the CEO of Disney down the road. Not immediately, obviously, but when he got into his 50s and 60s, maybe I could have definitely seen that happening. He was that kind of guy, and I think he would have done a phenomenal job.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you on that because even prior to Disney, when he worked, and for like productions of plays and being on Broadway, off Broadway, just trying to get his foot in the door, that's what essentially you're doing when you're even like a playwright. You're creating a story, so he already had that under his belt, and then moving into a lyricist for Disney. So, I mean, he had a lot of different attributes under his belt as far as being able to run a company. So I definitely could agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have changed the course of Disney history quite a bit. I mean that would have been pretty crazy, if that would have come about. It just amazes me, and like I was a very young child in the 80s. Okay, I mean, and in the 80s, and Disney was not king. I mean, like as a kid at that time, I was more into Transformers and Smurfs and Care Bears and He-Man and that stuff. And I think most kids were at that time, right? And it wasn't really until Howard Ashman's influence with Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin where kids started to sit up and take notice. And when I was a young kid, I was still a kid, but I was getting older. It was really the Ashman films that got me into the Disney superfan status. That's what really that era really propelled me into that, And at that age, I really had no idea why. I just knew I loved these movies, And now looking back in retrospect, it was like, well, it was Ashman. It was his contribution and how he did this that made that he shaped so many lives, And I wouldn't be the Disney fan I am today if not for Howard Ashman, and the company wouldn't be what it is today if not for Howard Ashman. Now you're a '90s kid, if I'm not mistaken, right, George?
I am. Yes, I was actually born in the very beginning, 1990. So I started that era a little after The Little Mermaid. And kind of going off what you were saying is I think with the 80s, that would have been a hard time to really fully understand the company for what it is growing up as a child, because not saying that the 80s was stagnant for the Walt Disney Company, but starting in the 70s, that's when Walt Disney World opened. So you have that era where it became popular. And then prior to that, the 50s, the 60s, Walt was still around.
Right.
So and then when the 90s started, that's where the Menken and Ashman era started. So the 80s was left out of place between
Right.
everything else.
Yeah.
But but yeah, growing up in the 90s, my very first movie that I remember seeing was Beauty and the Beast.
Wow.
That was the very first one. And I mean, what a movie to start out with, to understand what Disney is all about.
Oh
Because,
yeah.
I mean, I know people, they rave about The Lion King, and The Lion King is awesome. It's great. It's perfect. But for me, the greatest animated film of all time for me is Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, George. Yes. Yes, I agree with you. I can't find a flaw in that movie. I can't. That's the kind of movie I want Disney to make from now until eternity with animation. That's the kind of movie I want to see come from that studio. It hits everything for me. It has great music. It's timeless. It's epic. It has that Disney. It's like it feels like a Walt era film almost, but it's not. It's still forward. It's kind of still modern. It just hit every button for me, and I absolutely love Beauty and the Beast. I mean, it's pretty much a flawless movie in my opinion. It really is.
And the animation is so crisp, and they involve technology that was just new in that time. They were using, some of like the type of pixels that they use in Pixar and everything, with
Right.
the digital, but they didn't like shove it in your face. Like they used it for the grand ballroom scene, but
Right.
it fit. It was perfect.
It was perfect.
And the one thing actually that you just said, where it was like a Walt era movie, and it
Mm-hmm.
was something that Ashman accomplished, was a film that Walt tried to do several times in his lifespan, but they just couldn't get the story right.
Really, I did not know that. So he
Yeah.
wanted to do Beauty and the Beast.
Walt wanted to do Beauty and the Beast. He tried it several times from the, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, from the original Jean Cocteau, who wrote the original book.
Wow.
And it was in the 40s that he tried, and the story was just not working right, and he kept on putting the book back on the shelf. So it didn't
Wow.
take until 1991 where the film was released, and it was actually Howard Ashman that actually was that missing puzzle piece that got the film up and running.
That's incredible. I did not know that. I knew they were looking into doing the Snow Queen for a while because I know there was some Mark Davis like art for that for years back. I never knew about Beauty and the Beast. That's very interesting, George.
Yeah. And so Howard actually accomplished something that he actually figured it out over Walt at the time. So it was, yeah.
Well, and I think Walt would be very proud of how the final product turned out. I don't
Oh,
think how he would be
definitely.
disappointed in,
I
in
mean,
that.
I mean, it was, and me personally, it was the only, and I know that they changed things like with the Academy and everything, but Beauty and the Beast was the only animated film to be nominated for Best Picture. And I do know, like, nowadays, like they added like Up and they did like other things, but for me, Beauty and the Beast was like the creme de la creme. It was up against everything else. And to be
Yeah.
nominated for Best Picture, that was like completely unheard of during that time.
Yeah, it was unheard of, and actually, its loss really stuck with me. I even remember it lost to Silence of the Lambs that year,
Yeah.
and I remember I'm a little older. I mean, I was like I think in sixth or seventh grade actually when that happened. I still remember it. I was so mad when it lost. I was like, that movie deserved it. But yeah, I mean, it was a huge accomplishment at the time for an animated film to be nominated for Best Picture. It was incredible, and it was really such a comeback for Disney to come off of movies like The Black Cauldron, which I didn't hate it, but financially it was a flop, and a lot of people didn't like it. And then a few years later to come in and be nominated for Best Picture. I mean, it's an incredible comeback story. I mean and that's the other thing with Howard Ashman and that whole era is just the comeback story. My God, they went from rock bottom from like, not even having a studio on the lot to animate their films. They moved them off site, like in Glendale,
Mm-hmm.
to like to creating some of the greatest movies of all time. It's an amazing story.
It really is, and that was another part of the documentary that I kind of chuckled at, was they were describing like when Howard first agreed to join in with the Walt Disney Company. He probably thought, "Oh, I'm going to be on the lot. I'm going to see the building with the seven dwarfs," and they say we send him off to this little parking lot with all trailers, and it's like,
Wow, it's amazing. It's sad in a way. Like and a lot of younger people don't realize this. They don't realize how close Disney was to really being like either completely sold off or sold off and broken up into pieces. That era was not good for them. It was
no,
not
it
good for
wasn't.
them.
Had it like, and I think it was actually Don Hahn that said it, and I could be wrong. It could have been someone else that he said, with the Renaissance era, the Little Mermaid started paving the way, but Beauty and the Beast rubber stamped it. It was pretty much a done deal. And had it not been for Howard Ashman in stepping in and saying, kind of putting his foot down and saying, no, we have to do it this way. This will work. Trust me, this will work. That, yeah, I believe that the company would have been broken off into different entities and sold off to different companies.
Yeah. I mean, Howard Ashman, he contributed. What he contributed to the Walt Disney Company is so much more than just music. I mean, this man really did save, in my opinion. I mean, he saved the company. He really did. That movie, Little Mermaid, I kind of put it in the same category as like Snow White, because Snow White was like the first animated movie, and it kind of jump started a whole era, a whole thing, right? For Walt,
Right.
It was a huge success. It was a big deal. Little Mermaid was that level of an event for Disney. It jump started a whole era. It created the Disney company we know today, and it's an enormously impactful movie. And then Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, and it's just crazy. We owe, as Disney fans, we owe Howard Ashman a debt of gratitude. Amazing man.
And I'm so glad that Don Hahn created this documentary, because a lot of times people say, oh, Disney pulled themselves out of the weeds. Disney did, this, and Disney did that. Well, yeah, that may be true, but it's about the people that make the company.
Right.
Who was really the person behind it? And a lot of people would say, well, I don't know who was behind that. Who's Howard Ashman? And it's sad. I mean, I've known about Howard for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
So, but to someone just, watching these movies maybe for the first time or introducing it to their children, it's like, well, who's Howard Ashman? Like, who? Well, if you go on Disney Plus, this is who Howard Ashman is.
Right. Exactly, George. And actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because like yesterday at work, I'm doing my thing. I'm working, and I actually was talking to my boss about it. I said, if you get a chance, because I know she has Disney Plus, I said you should check out Howard, because I know she likes Disney and stuff, but she's kind of a normie. Like, she's not like us, she's a casual fan. But I want to bring attention to everybody that I know of this man, of the people behind the scenes that, like you said, they don't know that the situation. They don't know who was behind these songs or anything. They know, Beauty and the Beast, it's a great movie. Oh, Little Mermaid, it's a great movie. They don't know, how that transpired, and what an awesome, incredible comeback story, these films were. They don't know it.
And it really shows, because the dedication that Howard had to literally work, as sick as he was, all the way up to the very end, where he would literally do his work sick in bed, and had the storyboards being brought to him, and listen to audio over the phone or what have you. And it was
unbelievable.
It's like a bittersweet moment, like at the end of Beauty and the Beast. I'm not sure, like, if you watch the animated Beauty and the Beast, at the very end of the credits, if you let it run all the way through, that they actually had a message to Howard, and it said, "To our friend Howard, who gave a mermaid her voice and a beast his soul, we will be forever grateful."
I
and
do.
that just pretty much said it all.
Yeah, no, and I have seen that, and I mean, it tugs at my heartstrings every single time I see it. It gives me, I got goosebumps even when you said it. It's pretty wild, and yeah, I mean, it's an incredible story, and I'm really, really happy that Disney did this. I'm glad that they have a platform now to tell these stories of these individuals that made such a huge impact, not just for Disney, I mean the world, you know. And I'm really glad because Howard Ashman deserves every bit of it. This man was an absolute legend, and he deserves every bit of it. And his story needs to be told, you know?
Yes, definitely. Because there was a lot of stuff that, I mean, I did know about him, but a lot of stuff that I didn't. And I loved how there was like behind the scenes footage that was never released before. It's only for this documentary, and it really definitely kind of reconfirms to all of us Disney fans of really how important he was to the company.
Yeah. And, you know, one thing without spoilers, and everyone who's watching this, if you haven't seen it, go see it, go watch it. This documentary, if you're a Disney fan, you have to watch this thing. But at the beginning, there was a part where his sister is describing like how Howard would put on these little shows in his room for his sister, right? With the cowboy, like the figurines in the room, and he would kind of do like his whole little show for his sister to entertain her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think as Disney fans, we've all kind of been there though, right? Like I remember as a kid in my room with my sister too. With my sister, we would act out Phantasmic, you know, like nerdy as it is, we would do that. We would act it out in our rooms, and you know, and I think I'm sure you have a million stories with stuff, similar stuff. Like I felt like we could all relate to Howard. We all have been there
Definitely.
with that, you know.
I actually did a one man show. I reenacted the whole entire film from beginning to end of Toy Story, one man show, and I had no audience.
That's amazing. That's amazing. See, we all have a story like that, and Howard, he's one of us. You know what I'm saying? Like he did that when he was a kid. We've done that when we were kids, and it's just, yeah. I really, I really wish we would have had him a little longer. Like at the end of that documentary, when they talk about how it was just the tip of the iceberg, I really do believe that. I mean, if he would have stuck around with us, I couldn't even imagine what was in that man's head. That we, you know, what else would we have gotten? What would Lion King have looked like with Howard Ashman around? Because you know,
Right, because as I said, even though he wasn't around for Aladdin, he still had his hands on that movie for some bit, quite, bit of it, but you could still tell when you watch Aladdin, you almost have that presence of Howard being part of that film.
oh yeah,
So it's like, well, after Aladdin, and as I said, don't get me wrong, The Lion King was beautiful, but you could still tell the difference.
totally.
Where it ended with Aladdin and it started with The Lion King. And then it moved on to, Hunchback and Hercules and Tarzan, which those were still very beautifully done films. I love them. Especially the Hercules soundtrack, but it was, you could still tell the difference just between like The Little Mermaid and Aladdin.
Oh, totally.
It has Howard written all over it.
Totally. One of the most touching moments, and I kind of want to go back to Beauty and the Beast just for a second, but one of the most touching moments in this documentary was at the very end when he unfortunately was losing his battle with AIDS. And I think it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Alan Menken that was in his hospital room, and he said, hey, people are, or maybe it was Jeffrey Katzberg, I'm not 100% sure, but they were saying, hey, we screened the movie and people love Beauty and the Beast. Who would have thought? And Howard, with his raspy voice, because he was really sick and everything, said, I would have. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like he had so much faith in this stuff. He knew exactly, it broke my heart to hear that,
It really was. And the fact that he didn't get to see the film completed, he didn't even get to be able to accept his second set of Oscars, for Beauty and the Beast. And it's just one of those things that it was sort of like it's hard to actually put into words. It really is, because I get jumbled up with words even talking about Walt Disney, because it's very few people that know how to touch upon something to actually reach millions of people, to let everyone feel the same exact feeling. It's like it's a greatest accomplishment. And to actually not be able to enjoy that moment. You go through all that hard work and you can't have that enjoyment with everyone. It's sad.
It's incredibly sad. And I feel like that with Walt Disney a lot. Like, I feel like, he kind of died at the peak, of the Walt Disney Company, of Disneyland and all that. And I feel the same way with Howard Ashman. He never really they never lived long enough to really see the full effect of their creation. At least though, I feel like, and this sounds kind of corny maybe, but these men like Walt Disney, Howard Ashman, that have left us, right? But their work lives on. I still feel like, every time you hear The Little Mermaid, every time you hear the Beauty and the Beast music, every time you hear these melodies, it's a piece of Howard, he's still with us in that way,
definitely. Even when I'm at the parks, if I'm at the parks and like how they have the music playing in the background, if I'm in Fantasyland and I'm hearing Angela Lansbury singing the Beast, or even on the Little Mermaid ride and you're going through the scenes and she's singing Part of Your World and Under the Sea, it immediately takes me back to Howard Ashman. Like, that's who pops in my mind. Like, I'm enjoying the ride, but it's like, oh, that's right. That's because of Howard,
Right.
And what an achievement to do for someone that it's so powerful that it automatically takes you back to think of that person. That even though they're no longer here with us, but as you said, they leave their mark and it's embedded big time.
Big time. Yeah. We'll talk about an impact on, like, cultural impact, I mean, he left his mark, and not every person understands who Howard Ashman is, but they do know his work. I mean, there's not a person on this planet who hasn't seen The Little Mermaid, or hasn't heard the music, or hasn't seen Beauty and the Beast, or hasn't heard the music. He's left his mark, and he is definitely I mean, again, he's another Walt Disney, and I think that had we not have lost him so soon, that man would have done amazing things going forward. I couldn't even imagine.
He probably would have. I mean, even just as you said, he could have potentially become CEO. I think he would have been maybe the first ever CEO / lyricist / executive producer. Like, he probably, just like how Walt was, Walt had different touches on everything.
Right.
He thought like an engineer. He created theme parks, but yet he created movies. Who does that nowadays? Like, where do you ever see a theme park company creating movies, or vice versa?
I know. Yeah, and Howard Ashman had that same. He was wired like Walt Disney, where, like, he was always. I could definitely see him doing that, going in directions we couldn't even think of, So an incredible man, and everyone watching, if you haven't seen it already, watch Howard on Disney Plus. It's an amazing documentary. Have a lot of tissues with you, because it is very, very emotional. I watched it yesterday, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. It really hit me hard.
The second, I couldn't wait till yesterday. That literally, when I got up in the morning, that was the first thing I did. I just sat up in bed, turned on the TV, went on Disney Plus, and I put on Howard, because I was so curious to see how this documentary would play out, and it does not disappoint.
It doesn't. And I learned a lot actually about AIDS even. I mean, surprisingly, I've learned a lot about the disease itself. Like, you hear about it and you think, oh, you die of a cold, or you die of a pneumonia, or you die of, but they were talking about how, like, he lost his vision.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't talk. He had, like, speech problems and nerve problems. And I had no idea that that the disease like kind of ravages your body to that degree. I had no idea. And I even learned a little bit about that.
Yeah. And especially, not to get on, a lot of his personal side, but I was always curious because, I knew he was gay. He grew up in the theater and everything. And I knew that he died from having AIDS, but I never really put the two and two together of, how he contracted it, because
Right.
it was never talked about. It was just like, bam, he has AIDS, but this documentary sheds a light on, the story behind that, and how he was, all he wanted to do was to, love and be loved. That's all
Right.
he wanted. He wanted to have a family. He wanted to do his work and everything. And it's like unfortunate under the circumstances of how it happened. But I mean, I am glad that for the little time that we had Howard, he accomplished a lot.
Well, yeah. And, like you mentioned, that's a great point, George. Like the little time that we had with Howard. I mean, I don't even know how long he worked for Disney, but it couldn't have been very long because he passed away in March of '91. Mermaid came out in '89. He wasn't with them for very long. And look at the impact he had just in those few years from Mermaid, and then he died before Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the impact. I mean, it's incredible what he accomplished.
I would say probably 4 to 5 years the most he
Yeah.
probably had the company.
Yeah, and like in terms of his personal life, they do touch upon that a lot in this documentary. His first love, I think his name was Stuart, right? If I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
Stuart White, I believe, and they called him Snooze,
Yeah, snooze. Yeah.
and that was his first love, and they kind of drifted, and then he found his soul partner that he ended up being with until he passed away, which I think was, oh, what was his name? Was it Ben
I
or
think
Bill?
it might have been Bill.
Might have been Bill, and that was very touching. The personal aspects of this documentary are very, very emotional.
Yeah.
But it's an incredible story to tell.
And the partner who he ended up with before passing, they touched upon something that was very deep. And when they say that you're actually looking at somebody that you want to have a future with, but you're not going to have a future, you're literally prepping and preparing for their death.
Oh,
And it's just like, I can't imagine. I can't imagine.
it's heartbreaking because like they said in the documentary, like, as a couple, they planned this house together. They built their house together. They were going to live in their whole life, and they planned it. And it was like a 2-story house. And the guy was even saying, like, Howard couldn't even go upstairs. So we planned our future out, and Howard couldn't even really be fully a part of that. And yeah, I mean, it's just heartbreaking. I was a mess pretty much the entire time of this documentary, between the Disney stuff and the emotional stuff, personal stuff with Howard. It was a lot to take in.
Yeah, it really was. But I am very glad that, as I said, it was brought out to everyone's attention, so they could really not just know his accomplishments for what he did for the company, but know him as the person.
Exactly. And you know what, George? I don't know about you, but I guess I have a soft spot for the Disney song writers, I guess, because I'm absolutely enamored with the Sherman Brothers. Their documentary, The Boys, which is also on Disney Plus, blew me away, and I was just as emotional with that. And then now with Howard Ashman's documentary, and I was very emotional. It's crazy, but like these songwriters, these musicians, part of the Walt Disney Company, played such an enormous role in the company, more than people even know. You know, these
Oh,
guys
absolutely.
were, yeah,
I mean, if you
integral.
really think of it, take the songs out of every Disney film. Like you still
Right.
have the Disney film, but take all the songs out, and it's like, what do you? What I mean, they're still strong stories, but you need the music to carry that story.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're
And then
right.
speaking of the boys, the Sherman Brothers story, I mean, you said you need a box of tissues for Howard. That if you watch both of them, Howard and the boys back to back, you're going to need a therapist. So it's
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, and you know, it's funny, not to get too off topic, but it's funny, like weird, like with the boys, with the Sherman Brothers. You know, we kind of like, I don't know. I always had this impression like they were inseparable, like they never had a fight. They were just like these brothers that just loved each other to death, and they always got along. And that was and that's the farthest thing from the truth. I mean, they fought constantly, you know.
yeah,
And they even split up. And I mean, even like towards the end of the movie, said like there was a point in time when they didn't even see each other for years, and they ran into each other at the Mary Poppins on Broadway premiere. I mean, it's crazy. I
yeah.
never would have expected that with them.
No, I would have never. And they're the two sons, the cousins. You know, one son from Bob, the other son from Richard, and they haven't spoken. I think they said like 20, 30 years. And as you said, they didn't see each other until the Mary Poppins musical, where one family was on one side of the theater and the other family was on the other side. It was like, wow. It's like it was really that bad, but yet again, not to go off topic, but they said, but where they came together was the music.
Right.
That's where they shared their common ground. So I think it's just so amazing of how one's personal life can be put aside, and then it's just like this mirage. It's like, oh, they have this cookie cutter, sugar coated base life because they write these songs, and it's like, well, when you really figure out their real background life story, it's like, wow, there was more to it than just that.
Oh yeah. And the great thing about the Sherman Brothers, well, not the great, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe not the great thing, but the thing that I think was interesting, I think that's a better word for it, interesting.
A unique.
Unique, yeah. Well, what was that like? Okay, so like I think that Walt Disney, because there was a lot of talk in that documentary how the Walt Disney really kind of favored the Sherman Brothers. Those were like his right hand men. You know, he loved those guys, and I think part of that adoration that Walt might have had for the Sherman Brothers after watching the boys, I think some of that affection for them might have been because Walt maybe saw a little bit of his relationship with his brother in the Sherman Brothers. Because, you know, Walt and Roy were at it constantly too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were constantly fighting. Roy was constantly telling Walt, "You're nuts. That Disney, no one's going to go to your park. You know, like you're nuts. No one's going to watch an animated movie for an hour and a half. That's crazy, dude. You know, like but Roy and Walt were constantly kind of at each other's throats
Mm-hmm.
too. And I think that maybe now, in retrospect, after watching that Sherman Brothers documentary, maybe that's a little bit why Walt was, aside from creatively being brilliant, maybe that's why Walt was like, I like these boys. They remind me of me and my brother. You know,
That's
we
actually a
fought,
good.
you know?
That's actually a good outlook on it. I've never really considered that, but now that you say it, it does make sense. And just of how we're just all itching to go back to the parks, and we're all waiting for Disneyland, the original park, to reopen. Walt is probably up there right now. He probably just turns to his brother and says, "You were saying."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, George, buddy, thank you so much for coming on, man. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a great discussion, and something that you know a lot of people don't really have the conversation about, because I mean I can't even recall the last time I had a conversation about Howard Ashman. So I'm glad that we got to have it.
Yeah, me too. I mean, the man was incredible, and I want to do even if it's just my little part in, with my channel, I just want to spread the word about Howard, because he was an incredible man, and what he did for this thing we love so much, Disney. I just think we have to just spread the word as much as we can. Even if we have a little audience, whatever it is, that little bit makes a difference. But George, one last time before we go, let the good people know where they can find you.
Absolutely. You can find me on my YouTube channel at Disney Family Man 23. You can listen into the podcast I'm part of, the Grand Circle Tour podcast, on iTunes and Stitcher. And again, you can follow me on Facebook, George Falcione, and Twitter at Disney George.
You heard the man. Follow him on George Falcione on Twitter.
Yeah, no, at Disney George.
At Disney George on Twitter, and his YouTube channel, Disney Family Man 23. He's been pumping out a lot of great content lately. Your last video was great. The one with your Grand Circle Tour podcast host.
Oh, Jason. Yeah, I had him on. We were talking about Mulan coming to Disney Plus and where it could eventually stem out with, as far as like the start of maybe like having certain movies being released for a price.
Yes, that was a great conversation. Check them out, guys. Give him a like and subscribe. And thank you all so much for watching. And as always, have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.